Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this October 18th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. on First Amendment. They also play the show at 11 a.m., and if you can't get it there, go to my long-standing website at arcticbeacon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade regarding what I call the Vatican-led New World Order. I'm going to get right to it today. This is part 2 of what I call a look back at the Clintons, and I'm doing this because I think a lot of our younger listeners don't realize what these two people are all about. And I found a documentary of about an hour and 51 minutes that explains it pretty well. And you can go there and look at it yourself after you listen to the show. And it's quite interesting, and I recommend all you young people that don't know the Clintons and just think, oh, what you hear now on the news regarding her emails and regarding the Clinton Foundation and the money they take from foreign companies is something new. It's not. When Clinton Bill took over in the White House in the 90s, he basically sold our country out to China. And is involved. Do many of you really know what Mena, Arkansas is all about? And I think it's going to take me a couple days to finish this, but I'm at about 32 minutes into it. I want to start today with Mena, Arkansas, and perhaps you'll get an idea what these people are all about. Now, many of you are wondering why the Republicans and the Democratic Party support this criminal cartel. They're a part of it. The establishment is a part of this. They probably all have skeletons in the closet they don't want revealed. And that's why Trump really is a threat. Let's go and listen. And I'm going to put it on. Can you put this on for me? We're going to start with Mena, Arkansas.
Arkansas is tucked away in the remote Ouachita Mountains of western Arkansas. It became the site of one of the most enduring conspiracy theories of the late 20th century. The core allegation is that the airport was used to transport weapons to the Nicaraguan Contras, with collusion and cover-up implicating Governor Bill Clinton. It was a multi-billion-dollar gun-running, drug smuggling, and money laundering operation. Barry Steele was a legend in the cocaine trade. His drug runs were flown in from Latin America, loads averaging 300 pounds of cocaine and worth at least tens of millions of dollars, and parachuted onto remote sites in Arkansas. By the sheer magnitude of the drugs and money its flights generated, tiny Mena, Arkansas became, in the 1980s, one of the world centers of the narcotics trade, and the base of what many believed was the single largest cocaine smuggling operation in U.S. history. Larry Douglas Brown was Bill Clinton's favorite among the troopers assigned as his personal bodyguards. Brown gave hundreds of pages of testimony under oath and supporting documentation that the governor had clearly been aware of the arms and drug running out of Mena as early as 1984. The state trooper watched in despair while the governor did nothing about it. In October of 1984, Barry Steele and Brown had lunch at Cajun's Wharf in Little Rock, a popular restaurant in the Arkansas River bottoms. In conversations over the next few weeks, Steele casually referred to Clinton as the Gov, and acted like he knew the governor, Brown recalled. By December of 1985, Steele became a scapegoat and was sentenced to a halfway house in Baton Rouge. It was there that assassins found him and gunned him down in his white Cadillac on a rainy February night in 1986. IRS agent Bill Duncan and State Police Detective Russell Welch had compiled a mammoth investigative file on the Mena operation. The material became part of an eventual 35-volume, 3,000-page Arkansas State Police archive, a meticulous presentation of the Mena case for a grand jury. However, the cases were effectively suppressed. Duncan and Welch were not even called to testify before grand juries, state or federal. Duncan and Welch watched the Mena inquiry systematically quashed and their own careers destroyed as the IRS and state police effectively disavowed their investigations. On the night of August 23rd, 1987, just outside the little town of Alexander, Arkansas, Kevin Ives, 17, and Don Henry, 16, witnessed a cocaine drop, which was part of the drug smuggling operation in Mena, Arkansas. The boys were captured and their hands were tied behind their backs. They were kicked and beaten and finally executed. One of the boys was stabbed to death. The bodies were wrapped in a tarpaulin and placed across the railway tracks to be mangled by the next train. The Arkansas medical examiner, Fahmy Malik, ruled the deaths an accident. He said the boys had smoked marijuana joints and had fallen into a trance on the railway tracks, side by side. As the facts would later show, the crime lab never tested the concentration of marijuana in their blood. They were told to back Malik's ruling. Bill Clinton was the only person to whom the crime lab answered. Kevin Ives' mother, Linda, created such a stir that a grand jury was called to investigate the case. The bodies were exhumed, and a second autopsy was conducted by the Atlanta medical examiner, Dr. Joseph Burton. He showed an enhanced photograph of the wound to 6 other forensic investigators. They all concurred that it was a stab wound. He also found that Kevin Ives had been smashed in the head with a rifle butt. The report of the grand jury concluded that the deaths of Don Henry and Kevin Ives were definitely the result of foul play. It urged that law enforcement agencies, the prosecuting attorney's office, to continue the investigation into the deaths of Don Henry and Kevin Ives and into the drug problem in Saline County. Because of Linda Ives' investigation into the death of her son, she was placed on Bill Clinton's enemy list by White House counsel Mark Fabian. Already, people associated with the case were beginning to die in what amounted to a reign of terror among young people in Alexander, Arkansas. April 1988, Keith Coney told his mother he knew too much about the Ives-Henry murders and feared for his life. After being slashed in the neck, he was fleeing for his life on his motorcycle when he slammed into the back of a truck and was killed. Booney Bearden, a friend of the boys, disappeared. His body was never found. November 1988, Keith McCaskill claimed to have knowledge of the Ives-Henry murders, but was killed before he could testify. McCaskill, knowing that his life was in danger, had said goodbye to his friends and family. He died from 113 stab wounds. January 1989, Gregory Collins claimed to have knowledge of the Ives-Henry murders, but was killed before he could testify. Collins was found dead from a shotgun blast to the face. April 1989, Jeff Rhodes claimed to have knowledge of the Ives-Henry murders, but was killed before he could testify. His body was found in the city dump, dead of a gunshot wound to the head. July 1989, Richard Winters claimed to have knowledge of the Ives-Henry murders, but was killed before he could testify. Winters was silenced by a blast from a sawed-off shotgun. June 1990, Jordan Kettleson claimed to have information on the Ives-Henry murders, but was killed before he could testify. He died from a shotgun blast to the head. To date, no arrests have been made in regard to these murders. Arkansas's medical examiner ruled the death of 2 teenage boys an accident, while several forensic investigators and a grand jury concluded they were murdered. But this was not the first nor the last time that Fahmy Malik's rulings would cause controversy. In 1985, a North Arkansas man was fatally shot, and Fahmy Malik ruled it a suicide. There were 4 gunshot wounds to the chest. In a 1986 case, Malik's ruling was accidental drowning. It was later discovered that the victim had been shot in the head. In 1992, a man's body was found with 5 bullet wounds, but Malik nevertheless ruled it a suicide. In his most incredible ruling, Malik concluded that a James Milam had died of an ulcer. However, the man's skull was later recovered. He had been decapitated with a sharp knife. That Malik survived in Arkansas is a testament to Clinton's power. Just before Clinton announced his intentions to run for president, Malek was moved to another state job.
Please, Lord, taking my life from my men, but I'm sorry.
Union boss Arthur Coya has managed to build a political alliance with the Clinton administration. He attended the White House regularly to share breakfast with the First Lady and flew with Clinton on Air Force One. Even as Coya and the president gave each other gifts, such as expensive golf clubs, the Justice Department was filing a civil suit against Coya. It charged that he and his co-conspirators employed actual and threatened force, violence, and fear of physical and economic injury to create a climate of intimidation and fear. Members were intimidated into silence by violence, economic coercion, and by the known ties of local and international union officials with organized crime. Within days after a draft of the suit was delivered to Coya, President Clinton sent him 2 personal letters. One thanked Coya for his support of Democratic candidates, and another promised to share Coya's views on labor with Labor Secretary Robert Reich.
Mr. Free, over 65 people have invoked the Fifth Amendment or fled the country in the course of the committee's investigation. Have you ever experienced so many unavailable witnesses in any matter in which you've prosecuted or in which you've been involved?
Actually, I have.
You have? Give me a rundown on that real quickly.
I spent about 16 years doing organized crime cases in New York City, and many people were frequently unavailable.
So was that the only time you experienced something like that?
It went on for quite a while.
So the only time that you experienced anything like this was when you were investigating an organized crime syndicate.
On Monday, July 19th, 1993, President Clinton called FBI Director William Sessions to tell him that he was dismissed. It would be the first time in our nation's history that a president had fired an FBI director. He called a second time a few minutes later. The president seemed to be in a hurry. Time was of the essence. Sessions was to leave the Hoover building effective immediately. The next day, Vince Foster's body was found in Fort Marcy Park, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Under the assassination statute, the FBI would have been compelled by law to take over the case if there was any question that it might have been a homicide. But with the firing of its director, the FBI was in turmoil, and the Park Police became the lead agency in charge. The Park Service had neither the depth nor the experience to investigate a case of this magnitude, which led many to ponder the question, was it the intention of the White House to limit the scope of the investigation? Vince Foster had been a close friend of Bill Clinton's in their boyhood town of Hope, Arkansas. As Deputy White House Counsel for the Clinton administration, Foster became the highest-ranking U.S. government official to die under mysterious circumstances since President John F. Kennedy. He, more than anyone else, knew the financial secrets of both the campaign of 1992 and the Clinton presidency, just as he knew the secrets of the Rose Law Firm and of Hillary Rodham Clinton's business and financial dealings over the previous decade. Dealings that would become the subject of numerous investigations. On July 22nd, Foster's briefcase was searched twice by Bernard Nussbaum in the presence of Justice Department officials and the U.S. Park Police. 4 days later, a suicide note mysteriously appeared in the briefcase. It was torn into 28 pieces with one piece missing. No fingerprints were found on the note, only a partial palm print of Nussbaum's. Distinguished handwriting experts were contacted, the most famous being Dr. Reginald Alton of Oxford University in England. The note, he said, was a fake. It was the work of a forger. Associate Independent Counsel Mikel Rodriguez was not a conservative. Indeed, when he arrived from California with his ponytail, his earring, and his leather jacket, there were some that said Kenneth Starr had gone too far in his efforts to recruit liberal Democrats and ethnic minorities to his team. Rodriguez spent his time combing through the archive of documents in the Foster case, and he didn't like what he saw. He managed to gain access to the locked files in the office of the independent counsel. Hidden inside was a folder of crime scene photographs that had been deliberately withheld from the prosecutor. Among them was the original Polaroid of Foster's neck. Rodriguez went to the Smithsonian Institution for enhancement of the original. The blow-up photo revealed a dime-sized wound on the right side of Foster's neck, suggesting a gunshot fired at point-blank range into the flesh. The medical examiner at the scene was Dr. Howe. After examining Foster's body, he made reference to a wound on Foster's neck on page 2 of his report. This finding was in agreement with 2 of the rescue workers who testified before the Whitewater grand jury that they too saw a gunshot wound on Foster's neck. Incredibly, in the official autopsy report on Vincent Foster, a gunshot wound to the head is listed, but the wound on the neck is completely left out. The official autopsy conducted by Dr. Beyer states that there was a large 1 by 1 1/4 inch exit wound found on Foster's head. Both Fisk and Starr in their final reports similarly maintain that there was an exit wound on Foster's head. However, this is in direct conflict with those who examined the body at the scene. A .38 special will take the back of your head off. Blood and brain matter everywhere. Yet no skull fragments or brain matter were found by the FBI or Park Police. 2 days after Vincent Foster's body was discovered in Fort Marcy Park, an FBI memo was sent to then-acting director Floyd Clark. It says in part, quote, "Preliminary results of the autopsy include the finding that a .38 caliber revolver, constructed from 2 different weapons, was fired into the victim's mouth with no exit wound," unquote. This was in agreement with Detective John Rowland, who examined Foster's body at the scene. He agreed that there was no exit wound, and in fact stated that he thought the bullet might still be lodged in Foster's head. Paramedics Corey Ashford and Roger Harrison put the body in a bag for transport to the morgue, yet neither of them saw an exit wound or any blood, either on the body or on the ground beneath the body. This was in agreement with Dr. Howe, who examined the body at the scene and wrote in his report that the wound was mouth to neck. Paramedic Todd Hall was one of the first to arrive. He testified before the grand jury that he saw 2 men running away from the scene into the woods. Paramedic Richard Arthur, who had attended to 25 to 30 gunshot deaths in his 9 years as a rescue worker, believed it was a homicide. "I've just never seen a body lying so perfectly straight," he said. His colleague, Corey Ashford, also had coded the death as a homicide. For 4 months, Rodriguez probed the case. He called witnesses before a grand jury and soon discovered serious indications of a cover-up. By the early spring of 1995, he was starting to probe a hypothesis that the crime scene at Fort Marcy Park had been staged, that the gun had most likely been planted in Foster's hand, and that a crucial photograph of Foster's neck and head had been falsified. He turned to his boss, Kenneth Starr, for support. Nothing was done to resolve the matter. In March 1995, Rodriguez resigned. The only serious investigation ever conducted into the death of Vincent Foster came to an abrupt end. The confidential witness had stopped at Fort Marcy Park and had ventured about 700 feet into the wooded groves, where he spotted a body lying in the dense foliage. He looked as if he'd been dead for a long time. "I mean hours," he said. The bed of dried leaves below the body had been very heavily trampled, and his hands were neatly next to his body with the palms up. He said under oath to a congressional delegation that he saw no weapon, no gun. There was nothing in Foster's hands. police Polaroid shows a .38 Colt revolver hooked on Foster's thumb. It was made from parts of at least two separate weapons, and it had two different serial numbers. The only recorded sale to gun retailers of both serial numbers was in 1913, and that was too old to trace. Foster's fingerprints were not found on the gun, although a print belonging to someone else was found under one of the detachable grips. A .38 Special has a fierce recoil and can throw one's hand back over their head. However, the large sight on the gun did not damage Foster's teeth or gum tissue, and the gun was neatly at his side. Residents of homes as close as 300 yards away were never interviewed by the park police as to whether they had heard a gunshot. The bullet was never found. No matching ammunition was found in Foster's house. Also, note the heavy foliage around the body, which is inconsistent with the dirt pathway in front of the second cannon where the police claim the body was found. Foster would have had to walk 700 feet into the park, yet the FBI lab tests found no coherent soil on Foster's shoes. Investigators doing simulation walks found an abundance of soil on their shoes. Two homicide detectives who performed their own 2-month investigation into the Foster case concluded that the crime scene had likely been staged, with the gun placed in Foster's hand to make it look like a suicide. This report, funded by the Western Journalism Center in California, was prepared by Vincent Scalise and Fred Santucci, both veteran homicide experts from the New York City Police Department. Witnesses, Mark and Judy, were interviewed by the FBI in April 1994. They drove a white Nissan into the parking lot at Fort Marcy Park. Judy said she saw a man sitting in Vince Foster's Honda. Mark said that a man with long blonde hair had been standing by the open hood of Foster's car. Blonde hairs were later found on Foster's undershirt, his trousers, belt, socks, and shoes. But the FBI never tried to identify these hairs. Kenneth Starr concluded his report in July 1997 without calling these two witnesses before the grand jury. Another witness, Patrick Knowlton, stopped by Fort Marcy Park to relieve himself. He saw a car and Foster's suit jacket folded over the driver's seat. But it was not Foster's car. He also saw a threatening Hispanic man on watch in the parking lot of Fort Marcy Park. After telling the FBI what he saw, Mr. Knowlton was asked not to mention what he saw to the press. Mr. Knowlton agreed. 17 months later, he discovered through an investigative reporter his statements to the FBI had been changed. Knowlton's description of the unoccupied car in the lot was twisted, so it could have been Vince Foster's, even though his real statement rules out any possibility of the car being Foster's. The time he was at the park is expanded. It fails to say that Knowlton could pick the suspicious character out of a lineup. Through his attorney, Patrick Knowlton submitted a 20-page evidential insert to the 3-judge panel that appointed Kenneth Starr. As he put it, to make sure that the report was full and complete. Attached was Exhibit 1, which is a map of the cars in the Fort Marcy lot. Knowlton was parked next to an older model Honda that was not Vince Foster's car. According to the official record, the best estimates put the time of Mr. Foster's death at between 2 and 4 p.m. However, Mr. Foster's body was discovered at 5:45 p.m., or approximately 70 minutes after Patrick had left the park. Okay. Mr. Foster, therefore...
Okay, we're going to have to take a break, and we're going to come right back and pick up where we left off on the Investigative Journal back in 3 minutes.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. And before I get back to the Vincent Foster case and much more about the Clintons, the Clinton crime family, if you were listening closely, when Clinton became president, he fired William Sessions. Now, Sessions right now is a senator supporting Donald Trump. There's always connections here, folks. What do you think? We hear only now about the emails and the FBI working together with the Clintons. Well, they did it during the Vince Foster murder. This is nothing new. So this is the type of government you have, the rulers of evil. And it appears that the majority of Americans like it that way. Let's get back to the Foster case.
Would not have driven to the park in his Honda. Exhibit 2 was a map depicting the harassment Patrick suffered. The day he was subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, he was harassed by at least 25 men who would walk toward him or came at him from behind with threatening glares in their eyes. This technique is known to federal intelligence and investigative agencies, and its objects are twofold. One, to intimidate and warn witnesses in connection with his grand jury testimony, and two, to destabilize him and discredit his testimony before the grand jury. In this exhibit, Mrs. Foster could identify only a silver gun. So FBI agents apparently showed Lisa Foster a silver gun, told her it was found in Mr. Foster's hand, and falsely reported that she identified the black gun found in Mr. Foster's hand as belonging to Mr. Foster. And yet another exhibit shows that the FBI concealed the gunshot wound in Mr. Foster's neck by concealing the contents of the medical examiner's report, which states that there was a gunshot wound in Mr. Foster's neck. falsely reporting that the 35mm photographs were underexposed, concealing that Polaroid photographs vanished, and concealing that autopsy x-rays had in fact been taken. That in the U.S. Park Police report, Dr. Beyer discussed the existence of x-rays. That the technician who installed the x-ray machine said that it was in good working condition. But the Fisk report stated that the x-ray machine was inoperable at the time of Foster's autopsy, and as a result, no x-rays were taken. The sequence is crystal clear. In his notebook, Detective Rollo writes, "Dead body, Fort Marcy, warm sunny day." His handwritten notes also indicate that he called the Secret Service at the White House at 6:45 p.m. 20 minutes later, at 7:05 p.m., Secret Service logs show that Patsy Thomason checked into the offices of administration where Vince Foster's office was. Foster had kept important documents on Whitewater and other matters in his safe, and a short time later, a group from the Technical Security Division was logged in with her. They were experts in locks and safes. Trooper Roger Perry was on duty at the guard shack of the Arkansas Governor's Mansion when a call came through from the White House. Trooper Larry Patterson tells the story.
I had just gotten off work, had driven from State Police Headquarters to my apartment complex. Arrived home no later than 5 p.m. when I was just inside my apartment. I had not taken off my uniform. I had not gotten a Coke or a glass of water or something out of the refrigerator. I was in my apartment looking at my mail, getting ready to undress. The phone rang. I pick it up. It's Roger Perry. He said, "Larry, you will not believe what just happened." He said, "Helen Dickey just called from the White House and said that Vince Foster had just gotten off work, walked out in the parking lot, and shot himself in the head." So this was the latest, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, Washington, D.C. time.
Perry relayed the message to Governor Jim Guy Tucker. He also called Lynn Davis, the former commander of the Arkansas State Police. 4 men in Little Rock knew about the death of Vincent Foster before 6 p.m. Washington time, at least 15 minutes before the Park Police discovered the body in Fort Marcy Park. President Clinton appeared on Larry King Live at 9 p.m. It was being broadcast in the library of the White House. About 20 minutes before he went on the air, a CNN makeup artist was preparing the president for his television appearance when a man walked in and announced that a note had been found in Vince Foster's office. So the White House Secret Service, Chelsea's nanny, and 3 troopers in Arkansas had known for several hours, but Bill Clinton went on Larry King as if he knew nothing of Foster's death. At the time...
Okay, I just want to add something here and then get back to this. Okay, if you remember, we were talking in this documentary. They mentioned a Miguel Rodriguez, and he was the attorney brought in, the U.S. attorney brought in that found out all this information that would have really rocked the White House. He was sent packing, and you never heard from him again. So in April of 2006, when I was doing stories about Vince Foster, I said, why don't I try to find him? And so I did. I found him. He wouldn't talk, and I did get to his secretary, and I found something very interesting. Now, I figured the reason he's not talking is he fears for his life. They sent him to an office, the U.S. Attorney's office in Sacramento, and I wrote this story. I'll read to you a few paragraphs. I said, the cover-up of Vince Foster's 1993 murder gets stranger and stranger as the U.S. Attorney who blew the whistle on massive high-level White House criminality has apparently undergone a sex change. Lead investigator in the Foster case and U.S. Attorney Miguel Rodriguez, who went public in 1995 with allegations, independent prosecutor Kenneth Starr and others purposely withheld evidence and intimidated witnesses to cover Foster's murder, is now working in Sacramento, California, apparently under the name of U.S. Attorney Michelle Rodriguez. Although Rodriguez failed to return phone calls, a secretary in the U.S. Attorney's office Tuesday. This was Tuesday. I was reading the article as I wrote it on Wednesday. In Sacramento, confirmed Michelle was once Miguel, although not coming right out and saying it. Asked if the name Michelle, now this gets interesting, asked if the name Michelle was a mistake and the attorney in the office really was Miguel from Washington, D.C., the secretary said this, and I quote, she asked me, she said, "When was the last time you talked with Miguel?" asked the secretary, who then responded to the answer. If it has been that long, she was now Michelle. To further verify Michelle Rodriguez worked in the office, a September 29, 2005 Sacramento Bee News article referred to Rodriguez saying, Jared Oresti Giampoli and Stephen Foster Little are accused of, quote, interference with federally protected rights, according to documents filed by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michelle Rodriguez. Wow, things just get stranger and stranger, don't they, regarding this story. Let's get back to the Foster case.
At the time of Vince Foster's death, Hillary Clinton was in Los Angeles. As the LA Times reported, she cut her trip short and flew to Little Rock the day of his death. No reason was given as to the sudden change of schedule. Former FBI Director William Sessions stated that the Foster case had been compromised from the beginning. It was compromised when the White House took control of the FBI by firing Sessions the day before Foster's death.
And Attorney General Hubble said, "Don't believe a word you hear. It was not a suicide. It couldn't have been."
Gerald Parks was a Little Rock private investigator who became deeply enmeshed in the Clinton political machine. He later became head of security for the Clinton-Gore National Campaign headquarters in Little Rock. Later, during the early stages of the presidential campaign, Parks claimed to have made at least 2 trips to the airport near Mena, Arkansas. He said that Vince Foster had paid him $1,000 cash for each trip. He would pick up a trunk load of money from the Mena airport and deliver the money to Vince in the Kmart parking lot. Jerry's wife, Jane, was the manager of an apartment complex where Bill Clinton's brother Roger was living. Many times the governor would appear and indulge in marijuana and cocaine with his brother. Girls as young as 17 or 18 years of age were sometimes there to party with the Clinton brothers. When Jane told her husband about the goings-on in Roger Clinton's apartment, he began to write down names, dates, and license plates. He snapped photos from another balcony. Over a period of time, Parks had collected a thick dossier on the comings and goings of Bill Clinton. Jane Parks revealed that her husband had carried out sensitive assignments for the Clinton circle for almost a decade, and the person who gave him his instructions was Vince Foster. Foster had called the Parks home more than 100 times, identifying himself with the code name the Congressman. By the late 1980s, Vince trusted Parks enough to ask him to perform discreet surveillance on the governor. He needed it for Hillary, because she wanted to gauge exactly how vulnerable her husband would be to charges of philandering if he decided to launch a bid for the presidency. Jane claims that about a week before his death, Vince Foster telephoned her husband. Hillary was worried that there might be something in the files that could cause damage to Bill or herself. Jerry told Vince Foster that there was indeed plenty to hurt both of them. But you can't give her those files. That was the agreement. A few days later, Foster again called the Parks residence. He was calling from a payphone. He said he was going to meet Hillary at the flat, and he was going to give her the files. Parks then said, "You can't give Hillary those files. She's capable of doing anything." 2 days later, Vince Foster was dead. When he learned of Foster's death, Jerry Parks told his wife, "I'm a dead man." For the next 2 months, he was in a state of fear. He would carry a pistol to fetch the mail. On his way to the office, he would double back or take strange routes. 2 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Jerry had dinner at El Chico Mexican restaurant. the way back, a car pulled up beside him and shot and killed him with a 9mm handgun at point-blank range. His home was broken into before he was murdered. The only thing taken from his home was the files he had on Clinton's activities. Trooper Ferguson's ex-wife, Kathy, was to be one of the key witnesses for the prosecution in the Paula Jones case, and had been openly vocal about her belief in Paula's testimony. 4 days after Paula Jones filed her lawsuit against Bill Clinton, Kathy Ferguson was found dead of a gunshot wound to the head. Her death was ruled a suicide. The following is an affidavit of Sherry Butler, who was one of Kathy's best friends. Quote, Kathy Ferguson had been a friend of mine from 1991 to 1994, and on occasion had mentioned that while attending functions at the governor's mansion, then Governor Bill Clinton had cornered her in the kitchen of the mansion and pinned her to the counter. Shortly before her death, Kathy stated that what Paula Corbin Jones was saying about Clinton was the truth, and, quote, I wouldn't put anything past Bill Clinton, unquote. Kathy Ferguson had been a nurse, and a number of medical personnel attended her open casket funeral. Her autopsy report had placed the fatal bullet's entrance wound at the right temple, with the exit wound at the left temple, making it a possible suicide. However, at the funeral home, 3 nurses, an RN and 2 LPNs, decided to make a careful examination of the wound. Yet none of them saw any wound at the left temple. What they did see looked to be a large, blown-out exit wound in the right temple. This puzzled them, because they knew Ferguson was right-handed. This prompted them to look for an entrance wound on the left side. One of the nurses rolled the corpse's head to the side. All 3 nurses were then able to see a cotton-stuffed wound behind the left ear. Several other hospital colleagues subsequently visited the funeral home and made the same observation. The following is an affidavit of Samuel Houston, M.D. I have been contacted by 6 nurses, who each described the head wounds of Kathy Ferguson at the open casket funeral, and described a small, clean, quarter-size hole with cotton balls stuffed within it behind her left ear, and a large blown-out wound to the right temple, pulling the right eye over. None of the above nurses saw any wounds on the area of her left temple, on careful examination of her head. So, according to the testimony of a doctor and 6 nurses, the bullet may have entered from behind the left ear and exited at the right temple, making Kathy Ferguson's death a possible homicide. Dr. Houston recalled his last conversation with Ferguson on the day before her death. She told him that she wished she did not know as much as she knew concerning the Arkansas State Troopers and their activities, and those of Danny Ferguson. Bill Shelton was an Arkansas police officer and boyfriend of Kathy Ferguson. He had been publicly critical of the ruling that stated Kathy's death was a suicide. A month later, Shelton was also shot behind the ear, and his death was also ruled a suicide.
Okay, before we continue with this, let's fast forward to today. We have the Clintons wanting to take control of the White House again, just reversing roles this time. And if we look at Trump, if I was Trump, I would go to a rally and put a big, huge screen up and play this. And I think it would rock the whole world, wouldn't it? And it would tell the American people the truth behind the scenes. But we have even William Sessions, who supports Trump, not saying much about it, right? All we're hearing is the topics of the day, somehow as if history doesn't matter anymore about these crime families. Now, why do you think they don't talk about it? Well, look at all the people that have died. Do you think the corruption is just in the Clintons? No, it spreads deep into Washington. And that's what we're up against, folks. Let's get back to the Clinton cartel.
In November 1993, Kathleen Willey was leaving the Oval Office from a private meeting with President Clinton when she ran into her friend, Linda Tripp. Willey told Tripp that Clinton kissed her and fondled her. Tripp described Willey as disheveled. Her face was red, her lipstick was off, and she was flustered. Kathleen's husband, Ed Willey, was manager of the Clinton Presidential Finance Committee. He was found shot to death a few hours after his wife's incident with Clinton. The death was ruled a suicide. Newsweek magazine had dropped hints that a former White House staffer was about to go public with her story of sexual harassment at the White House. A few days later, on July 6, 1997, Mary Catron Mahoney and two other employees at Starbucks coffee shop died of gunshot wounds. The restaurant's doors were locked when the victims were found, and nothing appeared to have been stolen, although nearly $4,000 was in the store at the time. Mary Mahoney was shot as many as 5 times. The Washington Post characterized the crime as an execution-style murder. She had been heavily involved in presidential politics, working on Bill Clinton's campaign in 1992, and served as a White House intern during the first Clinton administration. November 1997. A transmission shop owner opened the trunk of a tornado-ravaged car and found a trunkload of documents. Among them, a 1982 cashier's check for $27,000 payable to Bill Clinton. The source of the funds for the check was the McDougal Savings and Loan. The shop owner, Johnny Lawhon, was reluctant to talk about his discovery. He said, quote, "Clinton is the most powerful man in the world," unquote. Lawhon later died in an automobile accident. James McDougal had stated, quote, "Immediately concurrent with the check being found, I started getting a lot of heat. I am a prisoner of the executive branch," unquote. He was serving a 3-year sentence in the Federal Medical Center in Fort Worth, Texas, and was cooperating with the independent counsel into the investigation of the president. He was scheduled to testify before the grand jury. Against doctor's orders, McDougal was given an injection of Lasix, a diuretic. He was then put in solitary confinement, where he died of cardiac arrest. Ron Brown was the target of a major probe headed by independent counsel Daniel Pearson. There were allegations that Brown had received a bribe from a Vietnamese businessman. He was also being investigated for numerous scandals by the FBI, the FDIC, a Congressional Oversight Committee, the Energy Department, the Senate Judiciary Committee, and even his own Commerce Department Inspector General. Brown's business partner, Nolanda Hill, would later testify in March 1998 that White House officials wanted him to cover up a scheme involving the sale of U.S. trade mission slots to executives in exchange for contributions for the upcoming Clinton-Gore presidential campaign and the Democratic Party. She said, "Ron expressed to me his displeasure that the purpose of the commerce trade missions had been and were being perverted at the direction of the White House." On April 3, 1996, an Air Force Boeing 737 carrying Commerce Secretary Ron Brown and 34 others on a trade mission to the Balkans crashed into a hillside near Croatia's Dubrovnik Airport. Air Force procedure called for a 2-step investigation. However, for the first time in memory, the Air Force canceled the first step, which called for a safety investigation of a crash on friendly soil. An autopsy on Brown's body would typically have been part of this investigation. They instead went directly to the second and final step, consisting mostly of legal proceedings that would mirror the sentiments of the Pentagon and White House officials, who implied the crash was nothing more than an accident. The Croatian wire service reported that the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder had been recovered. Later, the Pentagon disputed this, saying that no voice recorder was on board. But Hillary Clinton flew on the very same aircraft 2 weeks prior. making it unlikely that a voice recorder would not have been on board. The Air Force concluded that Brown's plane was 10 degrees or almost 2 miles off course. Maintenance Chief Nico Jersic was in charge of the ground beacons and was scheduled to be grilled by the U.S. Air Force Accident Investigation Team. However, he was found shot to death 3 days following the crash. His death was ruled a suicide. Over 3 hours after the crash, the first search party arrived on the scene and miraculously found a survivor. Air Force Tech Sergeant Shelley Kelly was found alive and would have helped officials with their investigation into the crash. But she died of a broken neck on the way to a nearby hospital. Lieutenant Steve Cogswell, a forensic pathologist who investigated the crash, contends there is evidence that Ron Brown might have been murdered. He said, quote, "Essentially, Brown had a 45/100-inch inwardly beveling circular hole in the top of his head, which is essentially the description of a .45 caliber gunshot wound. This man needs an autopsy. This whole thing stinks," unquote.
Yeah, the whole thing does stink, and it still stinks today. Stinks to high heaven, to be honest with you. And you know something? We're getting nothing when you watch these presidential elections. We're getting just the tip of the iceberg to make Americans feel good. But if you're going to give this White House back to the Clintons, my goodness, I have to just shake my head right now as I watch this. And you know what? We're going to get back tomorrow and finish it up because it gets really good. And like I said, why doesn't just Trump put this up on a big, huge screen? And boy, that would shake things up, wouldn't it? Back in tomorrow. Yes, back tomorrow, Wednesday, on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.